The cabin sat small and dark against the endless white of the Colorado winter. Snow clung to the pine logs like frozen breath. Inside, firelight painted the walls gold and amber shadows, dancing across the rough-hewn timber as if the wood itself remembered warmer days. The year was 1907, and the man sitting by the hearth had seen 78 winters come and go, each one leaving its mark in the lines of his weathered face. Ethan Wolfe held his gnarled hands toward the flames. The joints ached with the memory of old breaks, old wounds, old work done with young strength. His hair had gone white as the mountain snow outside, but his eyes remained sharp, the pale gray of winter sky. Those eyes had seen much. They had watched men die. They had watched children live. They had watched the woman he loved take her last breath. The door opened with a gust of wind and cold. His grandson stumbled in, 16 years old, and still growing into his height, all awkward limbs and earnest face. Benjamin stamped snow from his boots. "Found some old boxes in the loft, grandfather," the boy said, setting a wooden crate by the fire. "Thought we could burn what you don't need." Ethan nodded slowly. He watched as Benjamin opened the box, sorting through the remnants of a long life. Old books, their spines cracked and faded. A leather pouch that once held surgical tools. A knife with an army stamp on the blade. And then Benjamin's hand emerged, holding something that made the old man's breath catch. A rosary, wooden beads worn smooth by decades of fingers. The cross hung crooked on its chain, the silver tarnished to black in places. Benjamin turned it over in his palm, curious. "You weren't Catholic, were you, grandfather?" The words hung in the warm air. Ethan reached out and his grandson placed the rosary in his palm. The beads felt warm, as if they held some heat beyond the fire's reach, as if they remembered the hands that had held them first. "Not mine," Ethan said quietly. His voice came rough from years of silence. He lived alone, now spoke mostly to himself in the mountains, belonging to someone from a long time ago. Benjamin sat cross-legged on the floor, the eager way young men do when they sense a story. Ethan closed his fingers around the rosary. The firelight caught in his eyes, and for a moment he looked past the cabin walls, past the present moment, into a distance measured not in miles but in years. "The only woman I ever loved," he said, "and the reason I never married your grandmother." The boy's eyes widened. In his world, grandfathers were fixed points, unchanging as mountains. The idea that this old man had once been young, had once loved, had once chosen a path that led anywhere but here, seemed impossible. "I'll tell you," Ethan continued, settling back in his chair, "but you have to promise something first. Don't interrupt until I'm finished. Some stories, once you start them, you have to hear all the way through to understand what they mean." Benjamin nodded, solemn as an oath. Ethan looked into the fire. The flames shifted and curled, and in their movement he saw another fire, another time. February of 1842. He had been 29 years old. The mountains had been his home for 3 years by then, and he had thought himself content with solitude. He began to speak. The gunshot shattered the February silence like glass breaking in an empty room. The sound rolled through the canyon, echoing off the rock faces, distorting, until Ethan couldn't tell which direction it had come from. He stood perfectly still on the snowy trail, one hand on his rifle, the other holding the thin wire of his trap line. 3 years in these mountains had taught him to trust the silence. The quiet meant safety. The quiet meant he was alone, which was how he preferred it. But this sound, sharp and violent and unmistakably human, turned the wilderness into something else, something dangerous. His first instinct was to turn back to his cabin. Other people meant complications. Other people meant questions he didn't want to answer, connections he didn't want to make. He had come to the Bridger Range to be forgotten, and he had succeeded. The nearest settlement was 4 days' ride. He saw another living soul maybe twice a year when he brought pelts to trade. But then he heard the scream. It cut through the cold air like the cry of a wounded animal, but higher, more desperate. A woman's voice, thin with terror and pain. The sound pulled at something in him he thought he had buried 3 years ago when he left the army, left medicine, left everything that required him to care whether people lived or died. He moved before he made the conscious choice to move. His legs carried him down the slope through the snow that came up to his knees in places following that terrible sound. The rifle stayed in his hand. Whatever had made that woman scream might still be close. The overturned stagecoach lay in a ravine like a broken toy. One wheel still turned slowly in the air, creaking. The horses were gone, their traces cut. The driver lay in the snow 10 feet from the wreckage, face down, a dark stain spreading beneath him. Ethan recognized death when he saw it. The man had been shot in the back. He scanned the rocks above the tree line. No movement. Whoever had done this was gone, which meant they either thought everyone was dead or they were coming back to make sure. Neither option gave him much time. That's when he saw her. Black fabric against white snow. She lay half buried under the splintered wood of the coach, one arm visible, reaching toward nothing. The arm didn't move. For a moment, he thought she was dead too. Then he saw her fingers twitch. Ethan dropped to his knees beside the wreckage. Up close, he could see her properly. A nun's habit, black wool soaked with melted snow and something darker. Blood matted her hair where it had come loose from her veil. Her face was turned to the side, eyes closed, skin pale as the snow around her. She was young, maybe late 20s, with delicate features that would have been pretty if they weren't twisted in unconscious pain. He needed to assess the damage before he moved her. Years of field surgery had taught him that lesson in the hardest way possible. Move someone wrong and you could kill them as surely as any bullet. He worked quickly, his hands remembering old patterns. Her left leg was trapped under a heavy beam. When he carefully pulled her skirt aside, he saw the compound fracture immediately. The bone had broken through the skin just above the ankle. Blood seeped dark against the white of bone. Bad, but not immediately fatal if he could get her somewhere warm. Her head wound looked worse than it probably was. Scalp wounds always bled heavy. He pressed his fingers gently to her skull, feeling for the telltale softness of a crack. Nothing. Good. But when his hand moved to her shoulder to check for other breaks, she suddenly gasped, and her eyes flew open. They were gray-blue, the color of storm clouds, and they fixed on him with pure terror. "Please," she whispered. Her voice came out broken, desperate. "Please don't hurt me anymore." The words hit him like a physical blow. Don't hurt me anymore. Not don't hurt me and anymore, which meant someone already had. He pulled his hands back immediately, holding them where she could see them. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm trying to help." She stared at him, breathing fast and shallow. Her eyes darted from his face to his hands to the rifle lying in the snow beside him. She was trying to decide if she could trust him. He could see the calculation happening behind the fear. "You're hurt bad," he said quietly. "Your leg's broken. You need help or you'll die out here." "The driver," she managed. "Is he dead?" She closed her eyes. Her lips moved in what might have been a prayer. When she opened them again, some of the wildness had faded, replaced by a different kind of pain. The kind that came from knowing you were alone with a stranger in the wilderness and there was nothing you could do about it. "I need to set your leg before I can move you," Ethan said. He kept his voice level, the way he used to talk to wounded soldiers who were trying not to scream. "It's going to hurt, a lot, but if I don't do it now, you'll lose the leg." She swallowed hard, nodded once. He looked around for something to use as a splint. The broken coach offered plenty of wood. He pulled free a board about 3 feet long, straight and narrow. Then he took off his coat despite the cold and ripped the lining free. The fabric would do for binding. When he knelt beside her again, she was watching him with those storm cloud eyes. He could see her trembling, and not just from cold. Fear ran through her like current in a river. "What's your name?" he asked. Sometimes talking helped. Sometimes it didn't. But it was worth trying. "Sister Grace," she whispered. "Grace Brennan." "I'm Ethan, Ethan Wolfe." He positioned the board beside her leg. "I'm going to have to pull the bone back into place, sister. When I do, you can scream if you need to. Nobody out here but us and the mountains." "I won't scream," she said, her jaw set in a line that told him she meant it. Pride, he thought. Even in this much pain and fear, she had pride. "Bite down on this." He offered her a strip of leather from his belt. She looked at it, then shook her head. "I'll manage." Stubborn too, he almost smiled. Almost. He positioned his hands on either side of the break. Her whole body tensed. He could feel her holding her breath. "Easy now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Easy." Then he pulled. The bone grated as it moved back into alignment. She didn't scream, but her breath came out in a sharp cry that was almost worse. Her hands clawed at the snow, fingers digging down to frozen earth. Tears ran down her temples into her hair. Easy now, he said again, working fast to secure the splint before the shock wore off and the real pain set in. Almost done. Easy now, mountain man. The words came from her, not him. Breathless and broken, but somehow teasing even through the agony. Easy now, mountain man. As if she was the one comforting him instead of the other way around. He tied off the final binding and sat back. His hands were bloody. Hers too, from where she'd been gripping the snow so hard her nails had split. That's the worst of it, he told her. Rest is getting you somewhere warm. Where, she looked around at the empty wilderness. There's nothing for miles. My cabin, 2 miles north. Can you make it if I carry you? She studied his face, making that calculation again, deciding if she trusted him enough to let him take her away from the only landmarks she knew, away from any hope of rescue into the mountains with a stranger. Finally, she nodded. I don't have much choice. No, he agreed, you don't. He lifted her as carefully as he could, one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. She was lighter than he expected, all thin bones and black fabric. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood as he settled her weight against his chest, but she didn't cry out. The journey back to his cabin took 90 minutes that felt like 90 years. The temperature dropped as the sun sank behind the peaks. His arms burned with the effort of carrying her. Every few minutes she would slip in and out of consciousness, her head lolling against his shoulder, then jerking up as some fresh wave of pain brought her back. When she was awake, he talked, told her about the cabin, about how much farther, about anything that might keep her focused on staying alive. When she was unconscious, he was grateful for the silence. It let him think. Someone had attacked that coach, shot the driver, left this woman for dead. And the way she had begged him not to hurt her anymore suggested the violence hadn't ended with the crash. He'd seen the bruises on her wrists when he was setting the splint, seen the mark on her throat that looked like fingers had gripped hard enough to leave prints. This wasn't random. Someone had wanted her dead. The cabin appeared through the trees just as full dark settled over the mountains. It was small, rough-built for function rather than comfort. One room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table and chair. His traps and tools hung on the walls. Bundles of herbs dangled from the rafters, filling the air with the scent of sage and wild mint. He kicked the door open and carried Sister Grace on. The fire had burned down to coals, but the cabin still held some warmth. He laid her on the bed, the only bed, and turned to rebuild the fire. Behind him, she made a small sound. When he looked back, she had propped herself up on one elbow and was staring at the herbs hanging from the ceiling, at the leather pouch on the table that held his old surgical tools, at the medical texts stacked on the shelf beside the door. You know medicine, she said. Not a question, a statement. Some. More than some. Her voice was stronger now, sharpened by suspicion. That splint, the way you check for head trauma, the tools. She pointed at the pouch. Those are surgical instruments. He didn't answer, just turned back to the fire and built it up until flames were licking at the logs. You were a doctor, she pressed. Was, he said. Not anymore. He could feel her watching him as he moved around the cabin gathering what he needed. Clean cloths, water from the bucket by the door, the leather pouch with his collection of needles and thread and scalpels he hadn't touched in 3 years. When he came back to the bed with his arms full, she had managed to sit it all the way up. Her face was gray with pain, but her eyes were alert, studying him. I need to clean that head wound, he said. Check for other injuries. That means taking off the habit. He saw her stiffen. I'll be as quick as I can, he added. And I've seen bodies before. Hundreds of them. This is medicine, nothing else. She looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly she reached up and unpinned her veil. Her hair tumbled free, dark auburn shot through with red matted with blood on one side. She was younger than he'd thought, late 20s at most. Without the severe black frame of the habit, her face looked softer, more vulnerable. He worked in silence, cleaning the gash on her scalp. It needed 6 stitches. She sat perfectly still while he sewed, not making a sound except for the small hitch in her breathing when the needle went in. While he worked, he noticed other things. The bruising on her upper arms shaped like handprints, the raw skin on her wrists, a scrape along her collarbone that looked like someone had grabbed her necklace and yanked hard enough to break the chain. These injuries hadn't come from the coach crash. They were hours older, maybe a day. When he finished with her head, he moved to her leg. The splint needed to stay, but he could wrap it properly clean, the wound where the bone had broken through. She watched his hands as he worked, and he was aware of how gentle he was being. More gentle than necessary, maybe. But something about her made him want to be careful. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. Her hands clenched in the blanket. "The crash did this. Not the leg, the rest of it." She looked away. "I don't know what you mean." "Sister." He waited until she met his eyes. "I was a field surgeon. I know the difference between crash injuries and assault injuries. Someone hurt you before that coach went over. Who?" For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then so quietly he almost missed it, the men who killed the driver. The truth settled between them, heavy as stone. "Why?" he asked. "Because I saw them rob the coach. Because I can identify them." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "And because one of them decided a nun was too interesting to pass up." The words were flat, emotionless, but he could see what it cost her to say them. Could see the shame burning in her face, even though she had done nothing to be ashamed of. "Did he?" Ethan started. "No." She cut him off. "You arrived before, but he tried. And he said they'd be back to finish what they started once they found better shelter." Ethan sat back on his heels. Outlaws. Coming back. Which meant this cabin wasn't safe for long. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. I'm not certain. You get a good look at them. Good enough to testify in court." She lifted her chin. "Which is why they want me dead." He understood then. She wasn't just a witness. She was a threat. And threats in this territory got eliminated. "I need to sleep," she said suddenly. Her voice had gone thin again, stretched tight with exhaustion and pain. "I can barely think." "Sleep," he agreed. "I'll keep watch." She lay back slowly, every movement careful. He pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. Her eyes were already closing. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me there." "Didn't seem right," he said. "Most men wouldn't have stopped." He thought about that. Thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago, the army surgeon who had watched his own brother die on his operating table because he wasn't good enough, fast enough, skilled enough to save him. That man had run from medicine, from responsibility, from the weight of caring whether anyone lived or died. But apparently some part of that man still existed. Still heard a scream in the wilderness and went toward it instead of away. "Get some rest," he said. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Ethan sat in the chair by the fire and watched her. Watched the rise and fall of her chest. Watched for any sign that the head injury was worse than he thought, that she might slip from sleep into unconsciousness and then into something darker. But she slept peacefully. Her face finally relaxed, the lines of pain smoothed away. In the firelight, she looked almost peaceful, almost safe. He knew it wouldn't last. The first 3 days passed in a rhythm of care and caution. Ethan changed her bandages twice daily, checked for infection, made her drink willow bark tea for the pain, even though she protested that she didn't need it. She was a terrible patient, stubborn, proud. She refused help with anything she could manage herself, even when managing it clearly hurt. On the second day, he caught her trying to stand on her own, using the wall for support. She made it 3 steps before her broken leg buckled, and she would have fallen if he hadn't caught her. "Easy now, mountain man." She gasped, her face white with pain. There it was again. That phrase. It had become something between them, a private language. Sometimes she said it when he was changing her bandages and she needed him to slow down. Sometimes he said it when she was pushing herself too hard. "Easy now," a reminder to both of them that healing couldn't be rushed. "You're going to undo all my work if you keep this up," he told her, helping her back to the bed. "I won't be helpless," she said through gritted teeth. "Nobody said helpless, just patient." She glared at him, but she didn't try to stand again. By the 3rd day, she was strong enough to sit up for longer periods. He'd made her a crutch from a sturdy branch, and she practiced moving around the small cabin while he was out checking his traps. When he came back, she'd usually be sitting by the fire sorting through his collection of dried herbs. "You have foxglove," she said one afternoon, holding up a bunch of purple-brown leaves. "Good for the heart, small doses. And yarrow comfrey willow bark." She looked at him over her shoulder. "You learned this in the army." "Some, the rest from necessity." He hung his rifle by the door. "Turns out doctors are scarce in the mountains." "Why did you leave?" The question came quiet but direct. "The army, I mean. Why become a trapper instead of practicing medicine? He should have known she'd ask eventually. She was too observant not to notice the contradiction between his skills and his solitude. He sat down across from her, watching the fire. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then had a brother, James, 2 years younger than me. We enlisted together. I was the surgeon, he was infantry. She waited, didn't push, just let the silence stretch until he was ready to fill it. Seminole War, December of '39, bad fight. They brought him into my field hospital with a gut wound. His hands clenched on his knees. I knew it was bad, knew he probably wouldn't make it, but I tried anyway. Operated for 3 hours. He died on my table. I'm sorry, Sister Grace said softly. I couldn't save my own brother. What kind of doctor can't save his own brother? The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. So I left, came out here where my failures couldn't kill anybody. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I lost my sister, Mary. She was 23, tenement fire in St. Louis 5 years ago. I got out. She didn't. I heard her calling for me while the building burned. He looked at her, saw his own pain reflected in her eyes. I became a nun after that, she continued. Thought if I dedicated my life to God, her death might mean something. That maybe he'd spared me for a purpose. Did it work? The becoming a nun part, yes. The finding purpose part. She shrugged. I'm still working on that. They sat in silence after that, both of them staring into the fire. Two people who had run from their grief into different kinds of solitude and somehow ended up in the same small cabin in the middle of winter. Thank you, she said finally, for telling me. Thank you for not trying to fix it with easy platitudes. She almost smiled. I learned a long time ago that some pain can't be fixed, only carried. On the 5th day, Ethan went out to hunt. The cabin was running low on fresh meat, and Sister Grace was strong enough now that he felt comfortable leaving her for a few hours. He took his rifle and headed into the high country where he knew the deer liked to bed down. He was gone most of the morning. When he came back, the cabin was quiet, too quiet. He opened the door slowly, rifle ready, and found Sister Grace pressed against the far wall, her face white as bone. She had the crutch raised like a weapon. They were here, she whispered. His blood went cold. Hutan, 3 men, on horses. I heard them outside. Heard them talking about finding a nun from a stagecoach wreck. Did they see you there? No, I stayed quiet. But Ethan, her voice shook. They tried the door. They know someone lives here. He moved to the window looking out at the snow. Sure enough, there were fresh hoof prints. Multiple horses. The tracks led up to the cabin, circled it once, then headed back down the mountain. They'll be back, Sister Grace said. Won't they? He looked at her. At this woman who had already survived an attack, a crash, and a brutal mountain journey while half dead. Who had somehow kept her spirit intact through all of it. Who said, easy now, mountain man, like it was a benediction instead of a warning. Yeah, he said, they'll be back. Then you should take me away from here. Hide me somewhere else. Your leg isn't healed enough to travel. It'll have to be. She straightened, and he saw the steel beneath the gentleness. I won't let you die protecting me. Not planning on dying. Neither was the stage driver. Fair point. He spent the rest of the day thinking, weighing options. The smart thing would be to take her to the nearest settlement, hand her over to the law, and go back to his solitary life. But the nearest settlement was 4 days away, and she couldn't ride yet. They'd be sitting targets on the trail. That night, as they sat by the fire, she broke the silence. There's a mission, she said. St. Catherine's, in Montana Territory. 3 weeks ride on horseback through the mountain passes. I was traveling there when the stage was attacked. 3 weeks, he repeated. Your leg won't be strong enough for that kind of journey for at least a month. Then I'll wait a month, she looked at him steadily. But I can't stay here. Those men will find this cabin again. And when they do, they won't leave until they're certain I'm not here. He knew she was right, knew the smart thing, the safe thing was to get her away from here as soon as possible. The question was whether he was willing to spend weeks, maybe months, protecting a woman he barely knew from men who wanted her dead. He thought about his brother, thought about all the soldiers he hadn't been able to save, thought about 3 years of running from the weight of caring. When can you walk? He asked. With the crutch, I can manage short distances now. That's not good enough. You need to be able to move fast if we get into trouble. He stood. Starting tomorrow, we train, build up your strength, learn to move on rough terrain, and we prepare supplies for a long journey. She stared at him. You're going to take me? Seems like the right thing to do. Why? Her voice was barely a whisper. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why risk your life for a stranger? He looked at her across the firelight, at this woman who had survived so much and still had the strength to worry about his safety instead of her own. Because I couldn't save anyone at Seminole, he said quietly. Maybe I can save you. The next morning broke cold and clear. Ethan was outside splitting firewood when he heard the sound of hoofbeats. He dropped the axe and grabbed his rifle in one smooth motion, moving behind the woodpile for cover. A single horse emerged from the trees. The rider was wrapped in furs, face hidden by a hood. For a moment, he thought it was one of the outlaws come back alone to scout. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then the rider pulled back her hood, and he recognized Sarah Little Hawk. He'd met her 2 years ago when he first came to this territory. She was Arapaho from a band that moved through these mountains with the seasons. They'd developed an understanding. He let her people hunt in certain areas. She brought him game when his traps came up empty. It was a practical arrangement based on mutual benefit and respect. She dismounted and approached him slowly, hands visible, making no sudden moves. Wolf, Sarah, he lowered the rifle. What brings you up this high in winter, bad men? She spoke English with a careful precision, each word measured. They came to my camp 3 days ago, looking for woman in black. Said she run from stagecoach. Said she thief. Inside the cabin, he knew Sister Grace could hear every word, knew she was probably terrified. They find her? He asked carefully. Sarah's dark eyes studied him. She was too smart to miss the fresh tracks around his cabin, the signs that someone else was staying here. I told them I saw Ghost walking east toward the plains. A slight smile touched her mouth. White men believe strange things about spirits. Why send them east when you knew it was a lie? Because woman in black is not thief. I see her eyes in my mind. She has purpose. Spirits say so. Sarah reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in hide. For your journey, you will need it. She knew. Somehow she knew everything. He took the bundle. Inside was pemmican dried meat and a thick bearskin blanket. Sarah, he said, I don't know how to. You let my people hunt your territory. You trade fair. You do not cheat or lie. She swung back onto her horse. This is balance. Besides, you still owe me for that elk ground near the North Ridge. Thought we settled that. We will when you return. She gathered her reins. Mountain man is hard, but good. Woman in black should listen to you. She will need strength for what comes. With that cryptic advice, she turned her horse and disappeared back into the trees as silently as she'd arrived. Ethan stood in the snow for a long moment holding the bundle. Then he went inside. Sister Grace was sitting on the bed, her face a mixture of hope and fear. She helped us. Seems so. Why? With Sarah, you don't always know why. Just accept it and move on. He set the bundle on the table. But it means we need to leave soon. If those men are still searching, it's only a matter of time before they circle back this way. How soon, Song? He looked at her leg, at the splint still firmly in place. 2 more weeks, to give you time to build strength. Then we go whether you're ready or not. Those 2 weeks passed in focused preparation. Every day, Ethan pushed her harder, made her walk farther on the crutch, taught her to navigate uneven ground to move quietly through snow. She fell more than once, and each time she got back up without complaint, jaw set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. At night, they sat by the fire, and he taught her wilderness survival, how to read weather in the clouds, how to find water under ice, how to build a fire in the wind. She absorbed it all with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, and slowly, almost without him noticing, the walls between them began to dissolve. They talked about their lives before. She told him about teaching children in St. Louis, about the moment she'd decided to take vows. He told her about his mother who had taught him about healing herbs before she died, about the poetry he'd loved before the war made words seem insufficient. He read to her in the evenings, Started with medical texts, dry and impersonal, but she asked for poetry instead. So he read Wordsworth and Keats and Byron, feeling self-conscious about his rough voice stumbling over elegant phrases. But she closed her eyes and smiled, and he kept reading. One night she asked about the scars on his hands. Surgery, he said. Scalpel slipped once. Nearly took off my thumb. May I? She reached out tentatively. He let her take his hand. Her fingers traced the white line across his palm, the old burn on his wrist, the calluses from years of hard work. These hands saved my life, she said softly. They're just hands. No. She looked up at him. They're skilled hands, gentle hands, hands that chose to help when they could have walked away. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them could name. Then she let go and pulled back, and they both pretended not to notice what had almost happened. On the 13th day, when Ethan was out checking his last round of traps before they left, he saw smoke rising from the direction of the main trail. Too much smoke for a campfire. Too dark for green wood. He ran back to the cabin, his heart pounding. Sister Grace was exactly where he'd left her, practicing walking without the crutch. She looked up when he burst through the door, saw his face, and went still. What is it? Someone's burning something on the main trail. Could be nothing, could be I made them. He nodded grimly. We leave tonight, as soon as it's dark. They spent the remaining hours of daylight packing. He'd made a travois to drag behind his horse, a flat platform that would let her lie down when the pain got too bad. It wasn't elegant, but it would work. As the sun set, painting the snow red and gold, Sister Grace stood by the window looking out at the mountains. She was wearing the habit again, freshly cleaned. Her leg was still weak, but she could walk short distances now without the crutch. I'll miss this place, she said quietly, strange as that sounds. Nothing strange about it. It kept you safe. You kept me safe. She turned to face him. Ethan, I know what you're risking. If those men catch us, they won't. But if they do, I want you to know. You don't have to hand off. If it comes to that, if they have us cornered, you can tell them where I am. Save yourself. He looked at her standing there in her black habit, her gray eyes serious, her auburn hair tucked away again beneath the veil. Looked at this woman who had survived attack and betrayal and broken bones with her faith somehow intact. Who said easy now, mountain man, like it was a prayer. Not going to happen, he said. Ethan, I made my choice when I picked you up in that ravine. I don't unmake choices. He shouldered his pack. Ready. She picked up the small bundle that held her few possessions. The Bible she'd insisted on bringing despite the weight. The rosary that had survived the crash. A wooden cross worn smooth by years of prayer. Ready, she said. They left as the moon rose over the peaks, turning the snow blue-silver. Ethan led his horse with the travois attached. Sister Grace walked beside him, one hand on the travois for balance. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller, swallowed by darkness and distance. He didn't look back. Looking back was how you got caught. They'd gone maybe 3 miles when Sister Grace stumbled. He caught her before she fell, felt her whole weight sag against him. I'm sorry, she gasped. I thought I could make it farther. You've done well, better than I expected. He helped her onto the travois. Rest now. We have a long way to go. She lay back on the furs, her face tight with pain she was trying to hide. He adjusted the blanket around her, making sure she was secure. Easy now, mountain man, she said, and despite everything, there was the ghost of a smile on her lips. Always, he replied. They traveled through the night, keeping to the high country where the outlaws were less likely to search. The temperature dropped until breathing hurt, until the inside of his nose froze with each inhale. Behind him, he could hear Sister Grace's teeth chattering, no matter how many furs he piled on her arm. When dawn broke, they were 10 miles from his cabin, high in a pass he knew the outlaws wouldn't find. There was an old mining shelter there, half buried in a rock slide, but still solid enough to provide cover. He got her inside and built a fire while she huddled against the wall, shivering violently. Once the flames were going, he pulled her close to the heat, rubbing her hands between his to restore circulation. We made it, she said through chattering teeth. First part, he agreed. Now comes the hard part. What's that? Waiting, healing, hoping they don't find us. She looked around the shelter. It was even more primitive than his cabin. Rough stone walls, dirt floor, smoke-stained ceiling, but it was defensible and hidden, and that was what mattered. "How long do we wait here?" she asked. "Week, maybe two, until you're strong enough to make the journey to Montana." He met her eyes across the firelight. "It's going to be hard, Grace, harder than what we've done so far." "I know. If you want to reconsider, if you want to try for the nearest settlement instead." "No." Her voice was firm. "The mission is where I need to be. It's the only place I'll truly be safe. Those men are looking for a lone nun. They won't expect me to show up at St. Catherine's with a mountain man." He nodded slowly. She was right about that, at least. They settled in for the wait, days blurred together in the small shelter. Ethan hunted when he could, bringing back whatever game he found. Sister Grace grew stronger, daily pushing herself to walk farther, to put more weight on the healing leg. And in the close confines of the shelter, they grew closer, talked more, shared stories from their pasts. He told her about the first man he had ever lost on his operating table, a 17-year-old kid with his whole life ahead of him. She told him about the first child she'd taught to read, a 6-year-old girl who'd cried when she finally understood how letters became words. One night a week into their stay, she woke screaming from a nightmare. Ethan was beside her in seconds, but she was still caught in whatever horror her mind had conjured. "Grace," he shook her shoulder gently. "Grace, wake up." Her eyes flew open. For a moment she stared at him without recognition. Then she gasped and grabbed his shirt, pulling him close. "I saw him," she whispered. "The man from the coach. He was here. He was... It was a dream, just a dream. You're safe." But she was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms and held her while she trembled. "Easy now," he murmured into her hair. "Easy now. I've got you." Slowly the shaking subsided. She stayed in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, breathing in slow, deliberate counts, the way he'd taught her to manage pain. When she finally pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought I was past this." Fear doesn't follow schedules. Comes when it comes. He wiped her tears with his thumb, the gesture automatic and tender. Nothing to apologize for. She looked at him in the firelight, at this rough man who had given up his solitude to protect her, who said gruff words with gentle hands, who read her poetry and taught her to survive and never once asked for anything in return. "Ethan," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "Don't. You don't know what I'm going to say." "I do. And you shouldn't say it, because if you say it, I'll have to respond. And we both know there's no good answer here." She understood that whatever was growing between them had no future. She had vows. He had wounds that ran too deep to heal. They were two people thrown together by circumstance, and when circumstances changed, they would part. "You're right," she said finally, "but I want you to know, when this is over, when we reach the mission and I go back to my life and you go back to yours, I'll remember you. Everything you've done. Everything you are. Grace, let me finish, please." She took a shaky breath. "You say you're running from medicine because you couldn't save your brother. But Ethan, you saved me. Not just my life, my faith, my belief that there's still goodness in the world. You did that." He didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to explain that she'd done the same for him, that caring for her had reminded him what it felt like to be useful, to matter, to be something more than a hermit hiding from his failures. So he didn't say anything, just pulled her back into his arms and held her while the fire burned low and the night stretched on toward morning. The days in the mining shelter fell into a pattern as predictable as the rising sun. Each morning, Ethan woke before dawn to check the perimeter, looking for tracks in the fresh snow, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Each morning, he found nothing but silence and emptiness. The outlaws had either given up or were searching in the wrong places. Grace improved daily. The fever that had worried him the first week finally broke. The wound on her scalp healed clean, leaving a thin scar that disappeared into her hairline. Most importantly, her leg grew stronger. She could stand on it now without wincing, could walk short distances without the crutch. He watched her practice each morning, pacing the length of the shelter and back, her jaw set with determination. She never complained about the pain, but he saw it in the way she breathed, in the momentary hesitation before she put weight on that leg. Still, she pushed herself, and he respected her for it. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and he taught her what she needed to know: how to move quietly through snow, how to read the sky for coming weather, how to conserve body heat if she got caught in the cold. She absorbed every lesson with intense focus, asking questions until she understood not just what to do, but why. Why do you check north-facing slopes for avalanche danger but not south-facing, she asked one night. North slopes hold snow longer, gets deeper, unstable. South slopes get sun, snow melts, and refreezes in layers. More stable. He added another log to the fire. But after a big storm, all bets are off. Then you avoid steep slopes entirely. She nodded, filing the information away. What about animal tracks? You said you can tell how old they are by the edges. Fresh tracks have sharp edges. Wind and sun soften them over time. By tomorrow morning, the tracks I made today will look rounded, blurred. He picked up a stick and drew into the dirt. Also watch for scat. Fresh is dark and moist. Old turns gray, breaks apart. Why does that matter? Tells you if predators are in the area. Fresh sign means move careful. Old sign means they've passed through. He met her eyes across the fire. Out here, everything tells you something if you know how to listen. She was quiet for a moment, studying his face. Is that how you've survived alone for 3 years, by listening? Partly, mostly by staying away from people. And yet here you are, protecting one. He didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, he had too many answers and none of them were simple. So he changed the subject, asking about her medical training, and she let him redirect without pushing. But as the days passed, the conversations grew deeper. She told him about the orphanage where she'd worked before taking final vows, about the children who had no one else, about holding a 6-year-old girl while she died of scarlet fever, powerless to do anything but pray. I thought God would answer, she said quietly. Thought if I prayed hard enough, had enough faith, he would save her. Did he? No, she died just before dawn, in my arms. Grace stared into the fire. After that, I understood. Faith isn't a shield against suffering. It's just the thing that helps you carry it. Ethan thought about his brother, about kneeling beside James's body in that blood-soaked field hospital, too numb even to cry. Your God and I aren't on speaking terms. I know, you said that before. Don't you want to convince me, try to save my soul? She looked at him thoughtfully. I think your soul is doing fine, better than most men who claim to be faithful. How do you figure that? You saved me, fed me, protected me, asked for nothing in return. She pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. That's more Christian than half the Christians I know. He didn't know what to say to that. In his experience, religion was all words and rules and judgment. The idea that action mattered more than belief was foreign to everything he'd been taught. But sitting here in this rough shelter with this woman who had every reason to hate the world and still chose faith, he found himself wondering if maybe she was onto something. On the 10th day, he taught her about the plants that could save her life and the ones that would kill her. He showed her yarrow for stopping bleeding, willow bark for pain, and fever comfrey for broken bones. This one, he said, holding up a dried bundle, is foxglove. Good for the heart in tiny doses. Too much and it stops your heart completely. Has to be measured exact. Grace took the bundle, carefully examining the dried purple-brown leaves. How do you know the right dose? Trial and error, lots of error. He pointed to a scar on his forearm. Tested it on myself first. Nearly killed me, but I learned. She touched the scar lightly. You could have died. Better me than someone who needed my help. That's remarkably selfless for a man who claims to have given up on people. He pulled his arm back, uncomfortable with her touch and the warmth it created. Just practical. Can't learn medicine without risk. But she smiled like she knew better. That night, she showed him her knowledge in return. Medieval Latin prayers, she explained, that often contained medical wisdom. She recited verses about wound care, about plague treatment, about delivering babies when everything went wrong. The church preserved a lot of medical knowledge through the Dark Ages, she said. Monks and nuns were often the only healers in their regions. You learned all this to work in the orphanage? And because knowledge is prayer in its own way. Understanding how the body works, how to heal it, that's understanding God's design. She met his skeptical look and laughed softly. I know you don't believe, but it's true for me. He found himself fascinated by the way her mind worked, the way she could hold faith and science together without seeing contradiction. Most religious people he'd met rejected medicine as interference with God's will. Grace embraced both. "Teach me something," he said on impulse. In Latin, something useful. She thought for a moment, then began to recite. Ars longa vita brevis, occasio praeceps, experimentum periculosum, judicium difficile. The words flowed like music strange and beautiful in her clear voice. What does it mean? Art is long, life is short, opportunity fleeting, experiment dangerous, judgment difficult. She smiled. It's from Hippocrates, the father of medicine, a reminder that healing is both science and humility. He repeated the words slowly, his rough voice stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. She corrected his pronunciation patiently until he had it right. "Why teach me this?" he asked. "Because you're a healer who's forgotten he's a healer. Maybe Latin will remind you." She leaned back against the wall. "Besides, if something happens to me on this journey, someone should remember these words. Might as well be you. Nothing's going to happen to you. You can't promise that." "No," he admitted, "but I can try my damnedest to make sure." She looked at him for a long moment, firelight reflecting in her gray eyes. Then she reached out and took his hand. Not romantically, just a gesture of gratitude, of trust. "Easy now, mountain man," she said softly. He squeezed her hand once, then let go, because holding on too long would mean acknowledging something neither of them could afford to acknowledge. 2 weeks after they'd left his cabin, Ethan decided Grace was strong enough to travel. Her leg had healed enough to bear weight, though she still limped. More importantly, they were running low on supplies, and he was seeing more tracks around the shelter. Deer mostly, but once he'd found boot prints heading in their direction before veering off toward the east. The outlaws were still searching. It was time to move. They left on a clear morning when the sky stretched blue and endless above the white peaks. Grace walked beside the horse now. Instead of riding the travois, though, Ethan kept it rigged just in case. She moved slowly, carefully testing each step before committing her weight. "We'll take it easy the first few days," he told her. "Build up your strength." "I can manage." "I know you can. But we've got 3 weeks of hard travel ahead. No point burning yourself out in the first mile." She nodded, accepting his logic even if her pride wanted to argue. They made maybe 5 miles that first day. Not much, but Grace was exhausted by the time they stopped to make camp. He could see the pain in her face, the way she favored her bad leg, but she didn't complain. He built a fire and made coffee from the last of his grounds. They sat together in the gathering dusk, steam rising from their cups, neither speaking. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Can't stop you." "Why did you really leave medicine? And don't say it was just your brother. There's more to it than that." He stared into his coffee. Part of him wanted to shut down the conversation, but she'd been honest with him about her past. Seemed only fair to return the favor. "The war was brutal," he said slowly. "Not just the fighting, the dying. I'd operate on 20 men in a day and maybe save 5. The rest I'd just watch bleed out because there weren't enough supplies, enough hands, enough time. After a while, you start to wonder, what's the point? The 5 you saved, they were the point. Were they? Half of them died the next week from infection or gangrene or just giving up. The ones who survived went right back into battle. So I was just keeping them alive long enough to die somewhere else." He set his cup down. "Then James came in, my own brother, and I thought, this is different. This one I can save. This one matters. But you couldn't. I tried everything, every technique I knew, operated for 3 hours while he screamed and begged me to let him die." His voice went rough. "In the end, I had to watch him bleed out on my table, same as all the others. Except this time it was my fault. I should have been better. Should have been faster." Well, Grace set her own cup aside and moved closer, ignoring the pain it caused her leg. "Ethan, listen to me. You're not God. You can't control who lives and who dies. I was a surgeon. That's literally my job. No, your job was to try, to use your skills to give people a chance, but the outcome," she shook her head, "that was never up to you. Then what's the point of having skills at all? The point is you try anyway, even knowing you'll fail sometimes, especially knowing you'll fail." She touched his arm lightly. "That's not weakness. That's courage." He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that his 3 years of hiding had been unnecessary, that he could have gone back to medicine, that the lives he might have saved in that time weren't on his conscience. But wanting didn't make it true. Grace seemed to understand his silence. She withdrew her hand and picked up her coffee again. They sat together watching the stars emerge, neither pushing for more than the other could give. That night, he woke to find her shivering despite the blankets. He added more wood to the fire, but she didn't stop trembling. Grace. He knelt beside her. Her forehead was burning. Damn it. Fever. Probably from pushing too hard on the wounded leg. He should have made her ride the travois instead of letting her walk. Should have been more careful. He spent the rest of the night keeping the fire high and pressing cool cloths to her forehead. By morning, the fever had broken, but she was weak, barely able to sit up. "We're staying here today," he said. "You need rest." "We don't have time. Those men can't catch us if you're too sick to move. We stay." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but her body betrayed her, too exhausted to support her will. They stayed 2 more days while she recovered. Ethan hunted and kept watch and tried not to think about how much time they were losing. On the 3rd day, Grace declared herself fit to travel, despite still being pale and shaky. "You're not ready," he argued. "I'm ready enough. Every day we stay in one place is a day those men might find us." She struggled to her feet, using the travois for support. "Please, Ethan, we need to move." He studied her face, saw the determination there, and beneath it, the fear. She was terrified of being caught, terrified of what would happen if Dawson and his men found her. "Fine," he said, "but you ride the travois, no arguments." "I can walk." "I know, but you're going to ride anyway." He helped her onto the platform, wrapping blankets around her despite her protests. "Save your strength for when we really need it." She settled back reluctantly, accepting defeat. As he started leading the horse forward, she called out softly, "Easy now, mountain man. Don't pull too fast." He almost smiled. Almost. They made better time with her riding. The days blurred together in a rhythm of walking and resting, of scanning the horizon for threats, of counting down the miles to Montana territory. Grace grew stronger as they traveled. By the end of the first week, she was walking half the day. By the end of the second, she was keeping pace without obvious pain. He taught her to ride properly during their rest stops. She'd never been on a horse for long distances, and the skills were different from what she'd learned in civilized places. How to shift your weight on steep terrain, how to communicate with the animal through pressure and balance, how to stay mounted when the horse spooked. "Horses can sense fear," he told her. "You need to be calm even when you're terrified." Like now, she gripped the saddle horn as the horse sidestepped nervously. "Exactly like now. Breathe slow. Let your muscles relax. Show the horse there's nothing to fear." She took a deep breath and consciously loosened her death grip. The horse immediately settled. "Good," Ethan said. "Now you're learning." At night they talked about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her parents who'd emigrated from Ireland with dreams of a better life, about how those dreams had ended in a tenement fire. He told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, about a father who'd been a country doctor and taught him to see medicine as calling rather than just profession, about how that calling had turned to ash in the blood and mud of war. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one night. "Leaving medicine?" "Every day," he admitted. "But I don't know if I could go back. Don't know if I remember how." "I think you remember just fine. You've been practicing medicine on me for weeks." "That's different. That's just basic field care. You set a compound fracture in a snowstorm with improvised tools and no anesthetic. That's not basic." She met his eyes across the fire. "You're still a doctor, Ethan. You just need to remember you're allowed to be one." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. On the 12th night, disaster struck. They'd made camp in what Ethan thought was a secure location, a hollow between 2 ridges that hid their fire from casual observation. He'd been careful about tracks, about smoke, about every detail that might give them away, but not careful enough. He was outside refilling their water skins from a nearby stream when he heard the horses. Multiple riders coming fast from the south. He dropped the skins and ran back to camp, his heart pounding. Grace was already on her feet, eyes wide with fear. She'd heard them too. "How many?" she whispered. He listened. 6, maybe more. "What do we do?" He grabbed his rifle and positioned the horse between the camp and the approaching riders. "Get behind the travois. Stay down. Don't make a sound. Ethan, do it. Now. She moved quickly despite her leg crawling behind the makeshift barricade. He could hear her breathing fast and shallow with panic. The riders emerged from the trees. 6 men, all armed, all looking hard and mean in the firelight. The leader was a big man with a scarred face and eyes like chips of flint. Frank Dawson. Had to be. Dawson reined in his horse and studied the camp. His gaze swept over Ethan, the fire, the travois. Looking for something, someone. Evening, Dawson said. His voice was rough gravel. Didn't expect to find anyone this far up. Could say the same. Ethan kept his rifle loose but ready. You're pretty far from any trail. Looking for someone. Woman early 30s, dark hair. Nun's habit. You seen anyone like that? Just me out here, been trapping these mountains for 3 years. Don't see many people. Dawson's eyes narrowed. That's so. Then why do you need a travois awful big for hauling pelts? Use it for heavy loads. Elk, deer, easier than packing it all on the horse. One of the other riders, a thin man with a crooked nose, pointed at the camp. 2 cups by the fire, 2 bedrolls. Damn, Ethan had been careless. I like to keep a spare, he said evenly, in case I meet someone who needs help. Right, Dawson dismounted slowly. Mind if we check your camp just to be sure? I do mind. This is my camp, and you're not invited. Ethan shifted his stance slightly, bringing the rifle up an inch. Time for you to move along. Now that's not very neighborly. Dawson took a step forward. We've been tracking that woman for 2 weeks. Got reason to believe she's around here somewhere. And a man traveling with an extra bedroll in a travois that makes me suspicious. Your suspicions aren't my problem. They are if you're harboring a fugitive. Another step. Woman killed a stagecoach driver. Stole from the army. We're here to bring her to justice. It was a lie, had to be. The way Grace had told it, Dawson and his men were the killers. She was the witness. Already told you, haven't seen any woman. Ethan's finger moved to the trigger. Last chance. Get back on your horse and ride away. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dawson smiled cold and mean. Boys, he said quietly, check the travois. 3 things happened at once. Ethan fired, hitting one of the riders in the shoulder. The remaining men drew their weapons and returned fire. And from behind the travois, Grace did exactly what he'd told her not to do. She grabbed his pistol and fired at the man rushing toward her position. The bullet caught the outlaw in the chest. He went down hard, surprise frozen on his face. Get to cover, Ethan shouted, dropping behind the horse. Bullets whined past his head, thudding into trees and snow. He fired again, making the outlaws scatter. Grace was crouched behind the travois, the pistol shaking in her hands. She'd killed a man. He could see the shock in her eyes, the horror, but there was no time to process it. Sister, Dawson's voice cut through the gunfire. You come out now, this ends peaceful. You stay hidden, we kill your friend, and then we find you anyway. Ethan met Grace's eyes across the camp, saw her making the calculation, thinking about sacrificing herself to save him. Don't, he said sharply. Don't you dare. He's right. They'll kill you either way. I can't. Yes, you can. Stay down. Let me handle this. But the situation was deteriorating fast. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The outlaws had spread out surrounding the camp. It was only a matter of time before one of them got a clear shot. Then impossibly arrows began falling from the darkness. They came silent and deadly, striking 2 outlaws before anyone realized what was happening. The men went down without a sound, arrows buried in their chests. What the hell? Dawson spun, trying to find the source. More arrows. One grazed Dawson's arm, another pinned a rider's coat to a tree. And then Sarah Little Hawk emerged from the shadows, 3 Arapaho warriors behind her. They moved like ghosts. Weapons ready, faces painted for war. The remaining outlaws panicked. One tried to run and was brought down by an arrow. The others scrambled for their horses. Dawson stood his ground, bleeding from his arm, eyes full of hate. This isn't over. I'll find you, sister. And when I do, Sarah notched another arrow and drew. Dawson saw death in her eyes and finally broke running for his horse. He and his remaining man galloped into the darkness, leaving their dead behind. Silence fell over the camp. Ethan lowered his rifle slowly, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah walked over to where Grace was still crouched behind the travois. You need to move faster. They will return with more men. How did you find us? Ethan asked. Followed your trail. Was not difficult. She surveyed the dead outlaws with clinical detachment. These men are known killers. They have bounty on their heads in 3 territories. We didn't know, Grace said shakily. She was staring at the man she'd shot, her face white. Now you know. Sarah turned to Ethan. 3 days to Montana if you travel fast. There is old path through the high passes. White men do not know it. I will show you. Why are you helping us? Already told you. Balance. Also, these men insulted my people, demanded we give up the woman, threatened to burn our camp. Her eyes were hard. We do not forget insults. She pulled out a hide map marked with charcoal lines. Here, this path takes you through Eagle Pass. Steep but safe. 3 days of hard riding to St. Catherine's Mission. Grace looked at the map, then at Sarah. Thank you. I don't know how to repay. Do not repay, just survive. And testify against these men when you have the chance. Sarah's gaze shifted to Ethan. Keep her alive, mountain man. She has purpose still. With that, she and her warriors melted back into the darkness as silently as they'd come. Ethan and Grace stood in the firelight, surrounded by bodies, and spent brass, both trying to process what had happened. I killed a man, Grace whispered. I took his life. You saved mine. Saved both of ours. But I'm a nun. I took vows. I'm not supposed to. Her voice broke. He went to her, pulled her into his arms. She was shaking violently, shock setting in. You did what you had to do, he said into her hair. Out here, that's all anyone can do. She clung to him, her fists gripping his shirt. I can still see his face, the way he looked when... I know, that doesn't go away. But Grace, listen to me. You're alive. That's what matters. Eventually, the shaking subsided. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. We need to move. Not tonight, you're in shock. We both are. Dawson said he'd come back. He will, but not tonight. He's wounded and down 4 men. He'll need to regroup. Ethan guided her away from the bodies. We leave at first light. Follow Sarah's map. Put as many miles between us and this place as we can. That night, neither of them slept. They sat by the fire, not talking, just existing in the aftermath of violence. Grace prayed quietly, her rosary moving through her fingers. Ethan cleaned his rifle and tried not to think about how close they'd come to dying. As dawn broke, they buried the dead outlaws in shallow graves. It seemed wrong to leave them for scavengers, even if they'd been trying to kill. Grace spoke words over each grave, prayers for the dead that Ethan didn't understand but respected. Then they mounted up and began the hardest part of their journey. The path Sarah had shown them was brutal. Steep switchbacks that had the horse struggling for footing, narrow ledges where one wrong step meant a 100-foot fall. The elevation made breathing difficult, turned simple movement into exhausting labor. But Grace never complained, never asked to rest beyond their scheduled stops. She'd learned to ride well enough now that she could manage the terrain, though Ethan saw her white-knuckled grip on the saddle horn, saw the fear in her eyes when they crossed particularly dangerous sections. On the second day, they reached a section where the trail ran along a cliff, face ice coating the rocks. Ethan went first, testing each step before committing his weight. Behind him, Grace followed on foot, leading the horse carefully. Then her crutch slipped on a patch of ice. She fell hard, sliding toward the edge. Ethan lunged and caught her wrist, just as she went over her weight, yanking him forward. For a sickening moment, they both hung there, her legs dangling over empty air, him braced against the cliff, trying to keep them from falling. Don't let go, she gasped. Not planning on it. He pulled muscles, straining, and managed to drag her back onto solid ground. They lay there together on the narrow trail, both breathing hard, both shaking with adrenaline and fear. Thank you, she managed. You do the same for me. She turned her head to look at him. Their faces were inches apart, close enough that he could see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, could feel her breath on his skin. I would, she said softly. I'd do anything for you. The moment stretched between them, charged with everything they couldn't say, couldn't acknowledge. Then Ethan pulled back and stood, offering his hand to him. What's up? We should keep moving. Don't want to get caught on this section after dark. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had cracked, letting through feelings they'd both been carefully ignoring. That night they made camp in a small cave Sarah had marked on the map. It was tight quarters, barely room for both of them and the horse, but it was shelter from the wind. Grace sat with her back against the cave wall, her legs stretched out in front of her. It was swollen from the day's exertion, the old injury protesting the punishment she was putting it through. "Let me see that," Ethan said. She hesitated, then nodded. He unwrapped the bandage carefully. The leg looked angry, red, and hot to the touch. Not infected, but inflamed. He made her flex and point her foot, checking the range of motion. "Hurts?" he asked. "Some. More than some, I'd guess." He reached for his pack and pulled out the last of his willow bark. "This will help, and I'm going to massage the muscle, try to work out some of the swelling." "That's not necessary." "It is if you want to walk tomorrow." She fell quiet watching him work. His hands were gentle as always, but she felt every touch with an intensity that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with the way her heart raced when he was near. "Easy now, mountain man," she whispered when his fingers found a particularly tender spot. He glanced up at her, and for a moment their eyes held. In that look was everything they'd been denying, the caring that had grown into something more, the connection that went deeper than gratitude or duty. "Grace," he said quietly, "Ato, don't." She closed her eyes. "Please don't say it, because if you do, I'll have to respond. And we both know there's a no answer that doesn't hurt." His hand stilled on her leg. "You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just..." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Just know that if things were different, if I hadn't taken vows, if you weren't running from your past, if we'd met in another life, I would..." "I know." His voice was rough. "I know, Grace. Same." They sat in heavy silence, the cave feeling smaller with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, Ethan finished wrapping her leg and moved away, putting distance between them again. But that night, lying in the darkness, listening to her quiet breathing, he allowed himself to imagine what different might have looked like. A life where he wasn't broken, where she wasn't bound by vows, where they could have chosen each other instead of duty. The fantasy hurt more than the reality. The third day they descended from the high passes into Montana territory. St. Catherine's Mission appeared in the valley below them, a cluster of wooden buildings surrounding a small chapel. Smoke rose from chimneys. Gardens lay dormant under snow. It looked peaceful, safe. Grace pulled her horse to a stop and stared down at her destination. After 3 weeks of brutal travel, after violence and pain and fear, they'd finally made it. "That's it," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "You'll be safe there." "Yes." But she didn't sound happy about it. Sounded like someone facing an ending she wasn't ready for. They rode down slowly, neither in a hurry to arrive. But eventually they reached the mission gates. Before Ethan could dismount, the main door opened and an elderly priest emerged. Father Thomas Hayes was 70 if he was a day, with white hair and kind eyes that took in Grace's condition, Ethan's rough appearance, and the weapons they both carried. "Sister Grace," his voice was warm with relief. "My child, we thought you were dead." "Nearly was father." Grace dismounted stiffly. "This is Ethan Wolfe. He saved my life." Hayes looked at Ethan with new appreciation. "Then you have the gratitude of this mission and everyone in it. Please, both of you, come inside. You must be exhausted." "I should go," Ethan said. "Get back to..." "Nonsense. You'll stay for a meal at least. Rest your horse." Hayes's tone left no room for argument. "Any man who brings one of our sisters home safe deserves our hospitality." Before Ethan could protest further, a young priest came running from one of the outbuildings, his face panicked. "Father Hayes! Father Hayes!" "What is it, Thomas?" "It's the settlement, the one 10 miles south." The young priest was breathing hard. "There's sickness, diphtheria. The doctor died 3 days ago, and now 20 children are sick. They're asking for help." Hayes's face went pale. "I'm no doctor. I don't know how to treat..." "I do." The words came from Grace. "I ran a hospital at the orphanage. I can help." "Sister, you can barely stand." "Then I'll work sitting down." She turned to Ethan. "You have medical training. You could..." No, the word came out harder than he intended. "I'm not a doctor anymore. But those children will have to make do with what you can teach the local women. I'm sorry, Grace, but I can't." He saw the disappointment in her eyes, saw her understanding that some wounds were too deep to heal, even for 20 dying children. Hayes looked between them, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Wolf, I understand if you cannot help, but perhaps you'll stay long enough to see that Sister Grace is settled. She's been through much. I would feel better knowing she has a friend nearby for a few days at least. Ethan wanted to refuse, wanted to ride away right now before he got any more entangled in Grace's life, in anyone's life. But the old priest's request was reasonable, and the truth was he wasn't ready to say goodbye yet. 3 days, he said. Then I'm gone. Relief washed over Grace's face. Thank you. But as they walked toward the mission building, as Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a mistake, that staying even 3 days was going to cost him more than he was prepared to pay. He just didn't know it yet. That evening, after Grace had been settled into a room and Ethan had been given a bed in the guest quarters, he stood outside, watching the sunset paint the mountains red and gold. Father Hayes joined him, moving with the careful slowness of old age. Beautiful, isn't it? The priest said. I've been here 15 years, and it never gets old. It's something, Ethan agreed. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Then Hayes spoke again. Sister Grace told me what happened. The attack, the journey, everything you did to keep her safe. Just did what needed doing. No, you did far more than that, and I want you to know it won't be forgotten. Hayes clasped his hands behind his back. I also want you to know that if you ever decide you want to practice medicine again, this mission could use a doctor. Permanently. Ethan shook his head. I'm not that person anymore, Father. I think you are. I think you have been that person this whole time, helping Sister Grace, treating her wounds, saving her life. The old priest's eyes were knowing. Sometimes we run from our calling because we're afraid we're not worthy of it. But God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. God and I aren't in on speaking terms. Perhaps, but that doesn't mean he's not speaking to you anyway. Hayes turned to go back inside, then paused. Those children at the settlement, they're going to die without proper medical care. Sister Grace has knowledge but not experience. The local women will do their best, but it won't be enough. Only a trained surgeon could save them. The words hit like a gut punch. Hayes was asking him to choose. His comfortable isolation or the lives of 20 children he'd never met. That's not fair, Ethan said roughly. No, Hayes agreed. It's not, but it's the truth. The priest went inside, leaving Ethan alone with his conscience in the fading light. Grace found him an hour later, still standing in the same spot. You should get some rest, she said softly. Can't sleep. Because of what Father Hayes said about the children. He didn't answer. She came to stand beside him, close but not touching. I won't ask you to do something you can't do, Ethan. But I need you to know those children are going to die, and you're the only one with the skill to save them. I haven't practiced real medicine in 3 years. You've been practicing it on me for 3 weeks. That's different. That's basic field care. You said a compound fracture, treated infection, managed shock and fever. That's not basic. She finally turned to look at him. You're still a doctor. You just need to remember you're allowed to be one. The same words she'd said before, but this time there were 20 lives hanging on whether he believed them. What if I fail, he asked quietly. What if I'm not good enough and they die anyway? Then they die knowing someone tried. Someone cared enough to use their gifts even though it scared them. She touched his arm lightly. That's all any of us can do, Ethan. Try. Even when we're terrified, we'll fail. He thought about his brother, about all the soldiers who died on his table, about 3 years of hiding from the one thing he'd been trained to do. And he thought about 20 children whose only crime was being born in the wrong place at the wrong time. If I do this, he said slowly, I'm going to need help. Someone who knows nursing, someone I can trust. You'll have it. Grace's voice was steady with certainty. I'll be there every step of the way. He looked at her then. At this woman who'd survived assault and injury in a brutal mountain crossing without losing her faith in people and purpose, in the possibility that broken things could still be used for good. All right, he said. All right, we'll go to the settlement in the morning, see what we can do. The relief in her eyes was almost painful to witness. Thank you, she whispered. Those children, their families, they'll never know what this cost you. But I know, and I'm grateful. He didn't trust himself to speak, just nodded once and turned to go inside. But Grace caught his hand, stopping him. Ethan, easy now, mountain man. One step at a time. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to Trointo. Their words, their language. A reminder that he wasn't alone in this. He squeezed her hand once, then let go and walked away before he did something stupid like pull her into his arms and never let go. Tomorrow they would ride to the settlement and he would practice medicine again for the first time in 3 years. Tomorrow he would find out if he was still the surgeon he'd been or just a broken man playing at being whole. But tonight, standing in the darkness outside the mission, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The settlement of Pine Ridge consisted of 40 rough-built houses clustered around a muddy main street. It had sprung up 6 months earlier when gold was found in the nearby creek. Now those same families who'd come seeking fortune were watching their children die. Ethan and Grace arrived at midday. The town doctor's house stood empty, windows, dark, a black wreath on the door. The children had been quarantined in the church, a small wooden building at the end of the street. When Ethan pushed open the church doors, the smell hit him first. Sickness and fear and the particular stench of diphtheria. 20 small bodies lay on makeshift beds, some conscious and whimpering, others still in gray. Parents knelt beside their children, praying or weeping or just staring with the hollow eyes of people who'd already begun to grieve. Grace gasped beside him. Ethan felt his own chest tighten. This was worse than he'd feared. A woman approached them, wiping her hands on a blood-stained apron. "You're the doctor." "I was, once." Ethan set down his medical bag. "How long since the first symptoms?" "Week ago, started with the Johnson boy, spread fast after that." She gestured to the rows of children. "Lost 3 already. Doc Miller tried everything before the sickness took him too." Ethan moved down the line of beds, assessing each child with the clinical detachment that had served him during the war. Fever, difficulty breathing, the telltale gray membrane forming in throats, advanced diphtheria. Without proper treatment, most of these children would suffocate as the membrane blocked their airways completely. He stopped at a small girl, maybe 6 years old. Her breathing came in harsh wheezes, each inhalation a struggle. He gently opened her mouth and saw the thick membrane already covering most of her throat. Hours, not days, before she stopped breathing entirely. "This one needs a tracheotomy," he said quietly to Grace. "Now." Grace moved beside him, her face pale but determined. "What do you need?" "Boiled water, clean cloths, my scalpel, and something for the mother to hold while I work." The mother was a young woman, barely 20, her face streaked with tears. She looked at Ethan with desperate hope. "You can save her." "I'm going to try." The word try hung in the air like a prayer. He'd said the same thing to his brother, to 100 soldiers. The outcome hadn't changed because of his trying, but Grace's hand touched his arm briefly. "One step at a time," she murmured. Their language, their reminder. He nodded and began to work. The tracheotomy took 15 minutes. His hands remembered the procedure, even though his mind had tried to forget. The precise incision through skin and muscle, the careful opening of the trachea, the insertion of a hollow reed to serve as an airway tube. The child's mother watched with wide, terrified eyes as he cut into her daughter's throat. When he finished, the girl's breathing eased immediately. Color began returning to her lips. She wasn't cured, but she could breathe. For now, that was enough. "Keep the tube clean," he told the mother. "Change the dressing every few hours, and pray." He moved to the next child and the next. Grace worked beside him, anticipating what he needed before he asked. Together, they fell into a rhythm born of necessity and mutual trust. She cleaned wounds while he assessed the next patient. She held children still while he performed procedures. She spoke comfort to parents while he worked with grim efficiency. Hours blurred together. Ethan lost track of time, lost track of everything except the next breath, the next heartbeat, the next child who needed him. His hands grew steady as the work consumed him. This was what he'd been trained for, what he'd run from, what had been waiting for him all along. By evening, they'd treated 18 of the 20 children. 2 were already too far gone, the membrane, so thick that even a tracheotomy wouldn't help. Ethan knelt beside their beds and told their parents the truth. Nothing more could be done. Make them comfortable. Say goodbye. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Grace found him outside the church after midnight, sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. Blood stained his shirt. Exhaustion made his vision blur. "You should rest," she said softly, sitting beside him. "Can't. Need to check on them every few hours. Make sure the tubes stay clear." "I'll do it. You need sleep." "I'm fine." "Ethan?" She waited until he looked at her. "You've been working for 12 hours straight. You're no good to those children if you collapse from exhaustion." He wanted to argue, but she was right. His hands were starting to shake, his judgment getting fuzzy. He needed rest. "2 hours," he said. "Then wake me." She agreed, though he suspected she'd let him sleep longer if she could. He woke 4 hours later to Grace shaking his shoulder. "Ethan, one of the children, the girl you operated on first. She's having trouble breathing." He was on his feet and moving before he was fully awake. In the church, the small girl was gasping, her skin going blue. The tube in her throat had become clogged. Ethan worked quickly, removing the obstruction, clearing the airway. The girl's breathing eased, but barely. He could see her struggling, see her small body fighting a battle it was losing. "Easy now," he murmured, more to himself than her. "Easy now." But his hands were shaking. Not from exhaustion this time, from fear, from the sudden, overwhelming certainty that he was going to lose this child the same way he'd lost his brother, the same way he'd lost so many others. Grace appeared at his elbow. Her hand closed over his, steadying the tremor. "Easy now, mountain man," she said quietly. Their words, their anchor. He took a breath, then another. Let her presence ground him, remind him that he wasn't alone in this. That failure, if it came, wouldn't be his alone to carry. His hand steadied. He adjusted the tube, checked her pulse, made her as comfortable as possible. There was nothing more he could do except wait and hope. The girl survived the night. So did 16 others. By the third day, the crisis had passed. Ethan had saved 18 children. 2 had died despite everything he'd tried. He stood in the church looking at those 2 empty beds and felt the old familiar weight settle on his shoulders. Not good enough. Not fast enough. Not skilled enough. Grace found him there, staring at the space where children had suffered and died. "You saved 18, she said. "Lost 2. You can't save everyone." "I know." He did know, had always known, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. "Ethan, look at me." She waited until he turned. "Those 2 children were dying when we arrived. You gave them 3 more days with their families. 3 more days to say goodbye, to be held, to be loved. That matters." "Does it?" "Yes." She took his hand. "And the 18 you saved, they're going home. Growing up. Living. Because you remembered how to be a doctor." He looked at their joined hands. At this woman who'd watched him work himself to exhaustion, who'd seen him shake with fear and push through it anyway, who still believed he was capable of good despite all his failures. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, for not letting me run." "Always," she replied. The word hung between them with weight they both felt. Always implied a future they couldn't have, a together that wasn't possible. Before either could acknowledge the impossibility, shouts erupted outside the church. Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Frank Dawson and 4 men rode into town, all heavily armed. They moved with the confidence of men who'd come to finish something. "Sister Grace," Dawson's voice carried across the street. "I know you're here. Come out, or people start dying." Parents grabbed their children and fled into houses. The main street emptied in seconds, leaving only Dawson and his men facing the church. "What do we do?" Grace whispered. Ethan assessed the situation quickly. 5 armed men, limited cover, innocent people all around who would get caught in crossfire. "I'll go out," Grace said. "Talk to him. Maybe I can call." "No," Ethan's voice was flat. "You go out there, you die. He's not here to talk." "Then what?" "Stay inside. Let me handle this." "Ethan, you can't fight 5 men alone." He met her eyes. "I won't have to." He didn't explain, just checked his rifle, made sure his pistol was loaded, and headed for the door. Grace caught his arm. "Don't get yourself killed for me." "Don't plan on it." He covered her hand with his briefly. "But if something happens, if I don't make it, you testify against Dawson. You make sure those children you helped didn't die for nothing." "Ethan, promise me, Grace." She nodded, tears in her eyes. I promise, but you come back. You hear me? You come back or I'll never forgive you." He almost smiled. Then he pushed through the church doors and stepped into the street. Dawson saw him and laughed. "The mountain man! Didn't expect to see you again. Thought you'd be smart enough to leave the nun and run." "Not my style," Ethan said evenly. He stopped 20 feet from Dawson, rifle held loose but ready. "You need to ride out of here. There's been enough killing." "Has there? Because I count 4 of my men dead thanks to you and that Arapaho woman." "Seems like there's still balancing to do." "Your men died because they attacked an innocent woman. You want to blame someone? Start with yourself." Dawson's face darkened. "She's a witness to murder, to robbery. She talks, I hang. Can't let that happen." "Too late. She already talked. Marshall in Montana knows everything. Killing her now just adds another charge." It was a bluff. Grace hadn't testified yet, but Dawson didn't know that. The outlaw's hand moved toward his gun. "Then I've got nothing to lose, do I? You've got your life. Ride away now, you might keep it." "One man against Vision," Dawson grinned. "I'll take those odds." "Then you're a fool." Dawson went for his gun. Ethan was faster. His first shot took Dawson in the shoulder, spinning him around. His second dropped one of the other riders. The remaining 3 returned fire bullets, kicking up dirt around Ethan's feet. He dove behind a water trough, grateful for the cover. This was bad. 3 against 1, and he was pinned down. Then a rifle shot rang out from the church. One of Dawson's men jerked and fell. Grace appeared in the doorway, Ethan's spare rifle in her hands. "I said stay inside," he shouted. "And I said I wouldn't let you die for me." She fired again, forcing the outlaws to scatter. The fight became chaos. Bullets flew in both directions. Ethan's training took over his body, moving through patterns learned in war. Aim, fire, reload. Aim, fire, don't think, just survive. One of Dawson's men charged the church. Ethan shot him before he made it halfway. Another tried to flank around the side. Grace saw him coming and fired, missing, but making him dive for cover. That left Dawson wounded and furious, raising his pistol toward Grace. Ethan didn't think, just moved. Crossed the distance in seconds and slammed into Dawson, knocking them both to the ground. The pistol fired, wild bullet going nowhere. They struggled in the dirt. Dawson was bigger, stronger, fighting with the desperation of a man with nothing to lose. He got his hands around Ethan's throat and squeezed. Ethan's vision started to gray. He fumbled for his knife, found it, drove it into Dawson's side. The outlaw screamed and rolled away, clutching the wound. Ethan got to his knees, gasping for air, and reached for the pistol lying between them. His hand closed on it. He raised the gun. Dawson was on his knees, bleeding, eyes full of hate and pain. "Do it," Dawson spat. "Pull the trigger. Prove you're no better than me." Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. One pull and Dawson would be dead. The threat would be over. Grace would be safe. But then he heard her voice, not shouting, just speaking quietly from the church doorway. "Ethan, easy now, don't." He looked at her standing there with the rifle, her face streaked with powder smoke, her eyes steady on his. "He deserves to die," Ethan said. "Yes," she agreed, "but you're not a killer. You're a healer. Don't let him change that." He looked back at Dawson, at this man who'd attacked Grace, who'd murdered innocent people, who'd come here to finish what he started. And he lowered the gun. "On your feet," he said roughly. Slowly. Dawson struggled up, still holding his bleeding side. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." By the time the marshal arrived 2 hours later, summoned by worried townspeople, Dawson and his surviving man were tied up and under guard. The marshal looked at the bodies, at the wounded outlaw, at Ethan and Grace sitting on the church steps. "Hell of a fight," he said. "Hell of a day," Ethan replied. Grace gave her formal statement right there in front of witnesses. Everything she'd seen, everything Dawson had done. The marshal wrote it all down, then assured her Dawson would hang for his crimes. "You'll need to testify at the territorial court," he said. 3 months from now. Can you make it to Helena?" "I'll be there," Grace promised. The marshal left with his prisoners. The townspeople began cleaning up the damage, and Ethan and Grace were left alone with the aftermath. "You could have killed him," Grace said quietly. "Why didn't you?" "Because you were right. I'm not that man anymore." He looked at his hands, still bloody from the fight. "If I'd pulled that trigger, I'd have proven Dawson right. That there's no difference between us. There's every difference. Maybe. He stood slowly, every muscle aching. But I'm glad I didn't find out. That night, after the children had been returned to their grateful parents, after the church had been cleaned, and the dead buried, Ethan found Grace in the mission garden. She was sitting on a bench, rosary in hand, praying quietly. He almost turned away, not wanting to interrupt. But she looked up and saw him. "Couldn't sleep," she asked. "Too much on my mind." She moved over to making room. He sat beside her, both of them looking up at the stars. "Tomorrow I should go," he said. "Back to the mountains, back to my life." "Should you, Tom? You're safe now. Dawson's in custody. The mission has what it needs. No reason for me to stay." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What if I asked you to stay anyway?" His heart stopped. "Grace, I know we can't. I have vows. You have your solitude. We're from different worlds heading in different directions." She turned to look at him, moonlight catching in her eyes. "But I need to say this once, just once, and then I'll never speak of it again. Don't, please. I love you." The words came simple and clear. "I love you, Ethan Wolfe, not because you saved me, not out of gratitude or duty. I love you because of who you are, the man who reads poetry by firelight, who treats every patient with gentleness, who chose mercy when vengeance would have been easier." Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. "I love you," she continued, "and it changes nothing. I'm still bound by my vows. You're still running from medicine. But I wanted you to know, needed you to know, that saving my life was the least of what you gave me." Ethan felt his own eyes burning. "Grace, God, Grace, if things were different, but they're not, and that's all right." She wiped her tears. "I'll go back to being Sister Grace. You'll go back to your mountains, and we'll both carry this with us. This knowledge that somewhere in the world, someone understood us completely." He pulled her into his arms, then holding her tight, feeling her shake with silent sobs. He didn't say he loved her back. Didn't need to. She knew. They stayed like that until the stars wheeled overhead and dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Then by unspoken agreement, they separated, went to their separate rooms, prepared for separate lives. In the morning, Ethan's horse was packed, his rifle cleaned, his few possessions secured. Grace walked him to the mission gates, Father Hayes tactfully absent. "Where will you go?" she asked. "North, check on Sarah's people. Maybe help with their medicine woman, teach her what I know." He adjusted the saddle, not looking at her. "What about you?" "Stay here, help Father Hayes. Work with the children who come for schooling." She smiled slightly. "Try to forget a stubborn mountain man who taught me wilderness survival I'll never use." "You might use it, never know." "I suppose that's true." They stood facing each other, neither ready to say the final goodbye. Finally, Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out her rosary. "Take this for when you doubt. A reminder that faith isn't about buildings or vows. It's about believing in something bigger than yourself." He took the beads worn smooth by years of prayer. "I can't take this. It's yours." "It was mine. Now it's yours." She folded his fingers around it. "Please." In return, he gave her his army surgeon's knife. For when you need to cut through the nonsense. A reminder that sometimes the right thing is the hard thing. She took it carefully, running her thumb over the worn grip. "Easy now, mountain man," she whispered. "Easy now, Sister Grace." He mounted his horse. She stepped back. And without another word, without looking back, because looking back would break him, Ethan rode through the gates and away. Grace watched until he disappeared into the trees. Then she went inside and didn't cry until she was alone in her room, rosary gone, army knife clutched in her hands, and the future stretching empty before her. In the cabin by the fire, old Ethan paused in his story. Benjamin sat motionless, eyes wide. "But grandfather," the boy said, "you just left her, after everything." "What else could I do? She had vows, a calling. I wouldn't be the man who took that from her." "But you loved her." "Yes." The old man looked at the rosary in his hands. "More than anything, which is exactly why I had to let her go." "I don't understand." "You will, someday." Ethan fed another log to the fire. "Now let me finish the story." 5 years passed. 5 years of Ethan traveling from settlement to settlement, doctoring whoever needed help. He never took payment, Never stayed long. Just moved through Montana and Wyoming like a ghost healing and moving on. He kept the rosary always, carried it in his pocket where he could feel its weight, a constant reminder of gray eyes and auburn hair, and a voice saying, "Easy now, mountain man." He heard news of Grace occasionally. She'd become administrator of St. Catherine's Mission, expanded it to 3 buildings, built a hospital wing, trained other nuns in medicine. Her reputation spread across the territory as someone who would help anyone regardless of ability to pay. He was proud of her, and he missed her every single day. In the spring of 1847, Ethan was traveling to a new settlement near Helena when he found himself on the road to St. Catherine's Mission. He hadn't planned to go there. His conscious mind had other destinations. But his horse seemed to know the way, and he didn't stop it. The mission had changed, grown. The small cluster of buildings was now a proper compound with gardens and outbuildings and a real hospital. He almost turned around, almost rode away. But then he saw her. Grace stood in the hospital doorway giving instructions to a young nun. 5 years had touched her gently. A few strands of gray in the auburn hair, fine lines around her eyes, but the same determined jaw, the same graceful movements. She turned and saw him. For a moment, neither moved, both frozen by the impossibility of this meeting. Then she walked toward him slowly, and he dismounted, and they stood facing each other with 5 years of silence between them. "Ethan," she said softly. "Grace, you came back. Didn't plan to. Horse brought me here." A slight smile touched her lips. Wise horse. They studied each other, cataloging changes. His hair had more gray now, his face more lines. She looked tired but content, carrying the weight of responsibility with quiet strength. "You've done well here," he said, gesturing to the hospital. "It's impressive. We built it together. The sisters, the community." She clasped her hands. "I use everything you taught me, every day." "And your leg?" "Healed. Barely even notice it anymore except in cold weather." Awkward silence fell. So much to say, and no way to say it. "Would you like to see what we've built?" Grace asked finally. "The hospital, I mean. The techniques we use." "I'd like that." She showed him through the wards. Clean beds, proper surgical tools, herbs drying in organized bundles, young nuns moving with competence, treating patients with the gentle efficiency he recognized from his own work. "You taught them well," he said. "I learned from the best." In the surgical room, she demonstrated a new technique for treating infections. He suggested a modification. She incorporated it immediately, then showed him her method for managing fever in children. They fell into easy conversation about medicine, about techniques and treatments, and the constant struggle to save lives with insufficient resources. It felt natural. Right. Like coming home to a language he'd forgotten he spoke. Father Hayes found them there an hour later, deep in discussion about the proper dosing of willow bark for different age groups. "Mr. Wolf," the old priest said warmly, "what a pleasant surprise." "Father Hayes, you're looking well." "Well enough for an old man." Hayes glanced between them, seeing something in the air between them. "Perhaps you'll stay for supper. We have much to discuss." Over the meal, Hayes talked about the mission's expansion plans. A school for children, a clinic for the Arapaho bands, more training for sisters interested in medicine. "The only thing we lack," he said, "is a permanent doctor, someone who can teach advanced techniques, perform complex surgeries." His gaze settled on Ethan, someone with real skill and experience. "Father," Grace said quietly, Don't what? Offer a good man honest work." Hayes smiled gently. "Mr. Wolf, you've been wandering for 5 years, helping where you can, but never settling. Don't you tire of it?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "Then consider this. Stay here. Teach. Practice medicine properly instead of in scattered bursts. Build something lasting." The old priest's voice grew softer. "Work alongside someone who shares your calling and understands your heart." The implication hung heavy in the air. Grace looked down at her plate, her face unreadable. "I can't," Ethan said. "Grace has her vows, her life here. I won't complicate that." "Actually," Hayes said carefully, "Sister Grace is no longer under cloistered vows. As administrator, she holds a different position. More freedom, different obligations." Grace's head snapped up. "Father, we discussed that you needed to make your own choice. I'm simply ensuring Mr. Wolf knows what the choices are. Hayes stood slowly. I'll leave you both to talk, but Ethan, understand this. I'm dying. 6 months, maybe less. This mission needs leadership. Needs both of you if you are willing. He left the room, footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Ethan and Grace sat across from each other, the weight of possibility pressing down. Is it true, Ethan asked, about your vows? Partially, I'm still a nun, still committed to God's service. But yes, as administrator, I have more freedom than I did. She met his eyes. If I chose to leave the sisterhood entirely, I could. I'd lose my position, but I could do it. Would you, for me? Is that what you're asking? He didn't answer, couldn't answer, because asking meant admitting he wanted her to give up everything for him, and that felt impossibly selfish. Grace stood and moved to the window. 5 years ago, you rode away because I had vows and you had wounds. Have either of those things changed? I practice medicine now, help people, started to make peace with my failures. And I've learned to fight, to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. She turned to face him. We're not the same people who said goodbye. No, we're not. So the question is, if we met now as we are now, what would we choose? Ethan stood and crossed to her, looked into those gray eyes that had haunted his dreams for 5 years. I'd choose you, he said quietly. God help me, Grace, I'd choose you every time. Even knowing I come with a mission full of responsibilities, sick people and orphans, and endless needs. Especially knowing that, because that's who you are. That's why I love you. The words hung between them, finally spoken after 5 years of silence. Grace's breath caught. You've never said that before. Didn't seem fair to say it when we couldn't do anything about it. And now I'm saying it. I love you, Grace Brandon. Have loved you since the moment you said, easy now, mountain man, with a broken leg and more courage than sense. She laughed through sudden tears. I love you too. Have loved you through 5 years of trying not to. Through building this hospital and training these sisters and lying awake at night wishing you were here. So what do we do about it? We make a choice together. She took his hands. I'll talk to the Mother Superior. Arrange to leave the sisterhood officially. You stay here, we work together. Build this mission into something that helps thousands instead of hundreds. People will talk. Former nun mountain doctor. Let them talk. We've never cared about that. She smiled. Besides, who's going to argue with the people who saved 20 children from diphtheria? Fair point. So is that a yes? He thought about it. Really thought. About spending every day with her, working side by side, building something lasting. About finally stopping his wandering and putting down roots. About choosing love and purpose over solitude and regret. Yes, he said. That's a yes. She pulled him into her arms then, and he held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her heart beat against his chest. 5 years of separation dissolved in that embrace. Easy now, mountain man, she whispered. Always, he replied. 6 months later, they married in the mission chapel. Father Hayes performed the ceremony in his final official act. He died peacefully 2 weeks later, knowing the mission was in good hands. Grace wore a simple dress, not white, not the nun's habit she'd set aside. Ethan wore clean clothes and a nervous expression that made Sarah Little Hawk, attending as a witness, laugh quietly. The vows were traditional, simple. But when Ethan said, I do, and Grace said, I do, the words carried the weight of years and sacrifice in choosing each other despite everything. They worked together for 30 years, built the mission into a hospital that served 3 territories, trained dozens of doctors and nurses, saved thousands of lives, argued about techniques and treatments and whether willow bark or comfrey worked better for inflammation. They were not perfect. Ethan still carried ghosts from the war. Grace still mourned the life she'd left behind. But they carried those burdens together, and that made them bearable. People came to call them the Saint and the Mountain Man, though neither liked the nickname. They were just 2 people doing the work put in front of them, using the skills they'd been given, trying to leave the world better than they'd found it. In 1807, Grace fell ill. Pneumonia complicated by the old injury to her ribs. Ethan tried everything he knew, but some illnesses were beyond even his skill. She died on a cold February morning. Her hand in his, her last words a whisper he had to lean close to hear. Easy now, mountain man. He buried her in the mission cemetery under a pine tree. lived another 30 years without her training the next generation of healers or carrying her memory like the rosary she'd given him so long ago. In the cabin, Ethan finished his story. Benjamin sat silent, processing everything he'd heard. She died, the boy said finally. After everything, she still died. Everyone dies, son. That's not the tragedy. The tragedy is dying without having lived, without having loved, without having mattered. The old man held up the rosary. Grace and I had 30 years together, built something that's still saving lives today. That's more than most people get. Do you miss her? Every day, every single day. Ethan smiled slightly. But I'm grateful for what we had. Better 30 years with her than a lifetime of wondering what if. Benjamin looked at the rosary, understanding dawning. That's why you wanted me to hear this story. You're 16. Soon you'll start making choices about what kind of man you want to be. Those choices matter. Not just for you, but for everyone your life touches. What if I choose wrong? Then you learn and choose better next time. That's all any of us can do. Ethan handed the rosary to his grandson. I want you to have this. Keep it. Remember that love isn't about possession. It's about choosing someone's good over your own comfort. That sacrifice isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. Benjamin took the beads carefully. What happened to the mission? After you also, still there, still helping people. That's the thing about building something bigger than yourself. It outlasts you. Ethan stood slowly, old bones protesting. Come on, let's get some air. They walked outside into the Colorado night. Stars blazed overhead, countless and eternal. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and sage. Listen, Ethan said quietly. Benjamin listened, heard the wind, the creak in the distance, the settling sounds of the cabin. What am I listening for, Serge? Just listen. And in the wind, Benjamin could almost hear it. A voice soft and gentle carried on the mountain air. Easy now, mountain man. Did you hear that? He whispered. Ethan smiled. The wind plays tricks sometimes. Makes you hear what you want to hear. Your grandmother used to say, the mountains remember everything, every word, every prayer, every promise. Do you believe that? The old man looked up at the stars. I believe love doesn't die just because the body does. I believe the good we do echoes long after we're gone. And I believe somewhere in some way I don't fully understand, Grace knows I kept my promise, that I used my gifts, that I didn't waste the years she gave me. They stood in comfortable silence, grandfather and grandson, connected by a story and a rosary, and the understanding that some lessons can only be learned by living them. Thank you, Benjamin said finally, for telling me. Thank you for listening. Ethan put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Now go on inside, get some sleep. You've got a long ride home tomorrow. Benjamin hesitated. Will you be all right out here? I've been all right for 78 years. I'll manage one more night. The boy went inside. Ethan remained standing in the starlight, the rosary warm in his pocket, where he'd kept it for 65 years. The wind picked up, moving through the trees like breath, like memory, like a voice he'd loved and lost and never forgotten. Easy now, mountain man. Easy now, Grace, he whispered to the darkness. I'm coming. Just need to finish a few more things first. The stars wheeled overhead. The mountains stood eternal. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, two souls who'd chosen each other across impossible odds remained connected by words spoken in pain and trust and love. 3 months later, Benjamin received a letter. His grandfather had died peacefully in his sleep, the rosary in his hand. In his will, Ethan had left the cabin to Benjamin, along with a note. The note said only this: remember the story, live it forward, love bravely, choose wisely, and when life gets hard, remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is easy now. It means be gentle, be patient, be kind, to others and to yourself. That's the legacy your grandmother and I tried to build. Now it's yours to carry on. Benjamin kept the rosary, kept the story. And when he had children of his own, he told them about the mountain man and the nun who chose each other despite everything, who built something beautiful from brokenness, who proved that love and purpose could exist together if you were brave enough to reach for both. The story passed down through generations. The mission they built still stands, still healing, still serving, a monument to two people who understood that the greatest acts of faith are the ones performed in love. And sometimes late at night when the wind moves through the Colorado mountains, you can still hear it. A voice gentle and strong, speaking words that have become prayer and promise and reminder all at once. Easy now, mountain man. Easy now. The words echo in the darkness and the wind, in the hearts of those who know that some love stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with something better, a legacy that outlasts death, a purpose that matters beyond one lifetime, and the knowledge that choosing love, even when it's hard, is always worth it. Always.